Growing up, I always felt like I was living in the shadow of my younger brother, Alex. I'm 34 now and he's 28, but the dynamic between us has always been the same. Alex was the golden child and I was, well, just there. From as far back as I can remember, Alex got everything he wanted. It wasn't just the usual younger sibling treatment. My mom didn't just favor him, she idolized him. It was so blatant that even as a kid, I couldn't ignore it. My mom doted on Alex in every way possible. She cooked his favorite meals almost every night, while I had to make do with whatever was left over, sometimes even scraps. It wasn't like I didn't have my own preferences, but she never asked me what I wanted. She would wash and iron his clothes, make his bed, and even pack his school bag. When it came to me, she barely noticed if I even needed help. I had to take care of my own stuff, and more often than not, I was roped into taking care of Alex too. She'd say things like, "Michael, help your brother with his homework," or, "Be a good example for Alex." I heard it so much I started to hate the sound of my own name. Not that Alex ever appreciated it. He didn't care about the help. If anything, he seemed to think I was there for his entertainment. I've always been on the quieter side, someone who preferred to read or study instead of getting into trouble. I thought if I stayed out of the way, maybe things would get better. But Alex made sure to drag me back into his orbit. He was relentless. He'd make fun of me for my glasses, calling me Four Eyes, like it was the height of comedy. I've always been shorter than him, and he loved to remind me of it, calling me a runt, and shoving me just to prove he was stronger. One incident sticks out in my mind like a thorn I can't pull out. I must have been about 10, maybe 11. I'd woken up early and poured myself a bowl of cereal. Alex came into the kitchen and decided he wasn't in the mood to leave me alone that morning. He started flicking crumbs at me, laughing when I told him to stop. Then he grabbed a handful of pebbles. God knows why they were on the counter in the first place, and tossed them into my bowl. I just sat there, staring at my ruined breakfast while he laughed his head off. I wanted to scream at him, but I knew Mom wouldn't take my side. Sure enough, when I tried to tell her what happened, she rolled her eyes and told me to stop making a scene. I ended up going to school hungry that day. But the worst moment, the one that still plays in my head when I'm lying awake at night, came a couple of years later. I was 12 or 13, deep in the throes of depression that no one in my family seemed to notice. Back then, I didn't even have the words to explain how I was feeling. I just knew that every day felt like a battle to get through, and I was losing. Alex and I got into one of our usual arguments. I can't even remember what it was about. Maybe I didn't do something he wanted me to, or maybe he just felt like picking a fight. Whatever the reason, he turned to me, his face twisted with anger, and said, "Why don't you just kill yourself already?" He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. It wasn't just a mean thing to say. It was like he'd reached into my chest and squeezed. I was already standing on the edge of a cliff in my own mind, and his words were like a shove toward the abyss. I can't even describe the kind of pain it caused me. It wasn't just anger or sadness. It was a deep, hollow ache that made me feel like I couldn't breathe. I don't think Alex even realized how serious it was. He probably thought he was just being mean in the way siblings are sometimes mean to each other. But for me, it felt like a confirmation of every dark thought I'd ever had about myself. That I was worthless. That no one cared about me, not even my own family. Later that night, I tried to tell Mom what he said. I thought maybe this time she'd listen. Maybe she'd see how much I was hurting and finally do something about it. She didn't. She barely even looked at me while I spoke, just waved her hand dismissively and said I was being too sensitive. "Don't try to get your brother in trouble," she said, like I was making the whole thing up. I walked away from that conversation feeling more alone than I ever had before. It was like my pain didn't even exist to her. Alex could say or do anything, and she'd find a way to excuse it. That moment stayed with me for years. It shaped the way I saw myself and my place in the world. Even now, all these years later, I can still hear his voice in my head, telling me I wasn't worth anything. I don't think Alex ever understood the damage he caused, and I doubt my mom ever cared. It's hard to move on from something like that when the people who were supposed to love you the most made you feel like you didn't matter. In our teenage years, Alex somehow managed to get even worse. He'd always had a cruel streak, but as he got older, the pranks became more dangerous. One incident still makes my stomach churn just thinking about it. We were sitting in the living room, and I was reading a book, trying to ignore his usual taunts. Out of nowhere, he came up behind me with a lighter and flicked it on. Before I could react, he tried to set my hair on fire. My heart jumped into my throat, and I scrambled away, slapping at my head to make sure nothing had caught. I ran straight to my mom, expecting her to finally take this seriously. I mean, this wasn't some childish teasing or an offhand comment. This was physical. Dangerous. But, true to form, she brushed it off. "He's just joking, Michael," she said. Like trying to set someone's hair on fire was the height of comedy. "Don't make such a big deal out of it." Alex stood behind her, smirking like he knew he'd gotten away with it again. But that time, my dad got involved. He wasn't home often. He worked long hours and traveled a lot. But when he heard what had happened, he was furious. It was one of the few times I'd ever seen him lose his temper. He stormed into the living room and confronted Alex, his voice booming like thunder. "If you ever try something like that again, I'll call the police myself," he said. For the first time in years, Alex actually looked scared. My dad didn't stop there. He pulled me aside later that night and told me he wasn't going to tolerate Alex's behavior anymore. "You don't deserve this," he said, his voice softer but still firm. It was the first time I felt like someone in my family actually saw what I was going through. Then he surprised me by saying he was going to sign me up for boxing lessons. "I want you to be able to defend yourself," he said. At first, I didn't know what to think. I'd never been into sports or anything physical. I was the bookworm, the quiet kid. But something about the way he said it made me feel like maybe, just maybe, things could change. The first few weeks of boxing were brutal. My body wasn't used to that kind of exertion, and I came home sore and exhausted after every session. But slowly, I started to get the hang of it. The trainer was tough but encouraging, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of something. I started noticing changes not just in my body, but in my confidence. I walked a little taller. I spoke up more. And most importantly, I stopped letting Alex push me around. The turning point came a few months later. I'd been saving up money for months, over $400, for something I can't even remember now. I'd been stashing it in a drawer in my room, hidden under some clothes, thinking it was safe. One day, I went to add a few more bills to the pile and realized it was gone. My stomach sank. I knew instantly who had taken it. I found Alex in the kitchen, counting my money like it was his. He didn't even bother hiding it. When I confronted him, he just laughed. "What are you going to do about it?" he said. That smug grin plastered across his face. But this time something snapped in me. All the years of anger and frustration boiled over. Without even thinking, I stepped forward and punched him square in the face. The shock on his face was almost as satisfying as the sound of my knuckles connecting with his jaw. He stumbled back, clutching his face, and for the first time in my life, he looked genuinely afraid of me. I didn't stop to gloat or rub it in. I just grabbed my money off the table and walked away. But inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power, control. For once, I wasn't the victim. Alex didn't mess with me for a long time after that. I don't think he knew how to handle the fact that I wasn't scared of him anymore. Looking back, that was the moment everything changed for me. My dad's support and those boxing lessons didn't just give me the tools to stand up for myself. They gave me the confidence to realize I deserved better. It didn't erase all the pain Alex and my mom had caused me, but it was the start of me reclaiming my life. When I turned 20, I finally got the escape I'd been dreaming of for years. I enrolled at a prestigious university in another state, having earned a full scholarship. Felt like freedom for the first time in my life. The day I left home, I remember packing my things into the trunk of my car and not even looking back. For all the fear and self-doubt my family had left me with, the thought of being away from them was enough to outweigh everything else. I wasn't just leaving for school. I was leaving behind years of pain, anger, and disappointment. College was like stepping into an entirely different world. Nobody knew me there. Nobody knew about Alex, my mom, or the years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. For the first time, I could just be Michael, and that was enough. I threw myself into my studies, grateful for the chance to focus on myself without the constant chaos of home. I made friends, joined a few clubs, and even started to feel like I was building a life that was completely my own. It wasn't perfect. I still carried the scars from my past, but it was a start. It was during my sophomore year that I met Elizabeth, Liz as everyone called her. She was in one of my literature classes, sitting in the front row with her hair pulled back and a pen tucked behind her ear. I don't even know what drew me to her at first, but something about her confidence and the way she carried herself made it impossible not to notice her. We ended up getting paired together for a group project, and from there we started talking more and more. Liz was smart, funny, and unfiltered in a way that made me feel like I could let my guard down. She had this way of making everyone around her feel like they mattered. For someone like me, who had spent so much of his life feeling invisible, it was intoxicating. We started dating not long after that. Liz was the first person I ever truly opened up to about my family. I told her about Alex, my mom, the lighter incident, and the years of feeling like I was nothing. She didn't judge me or pity me. She just listened. She told me that I deserved better, and for the first time I believed it. Liz became my rock, the one person who made me feel like I was more than my past. After graduation, we decided to get married. It wasn't a grand affair. Neither of us had the money for anything extravagant, but it was perfect for us. We rented out a small venue, invited a handful of close friends, and said our vows in front of the people who mattered most. My dad came, but my mom and Alex didn't bother showing up. I can't say I was surprised. Part of me had hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'd want to be there for me. But when the day came and their chairs were empty, I realized I was better off without them. A few months after the wedding, Liz told me she was pregnant. I'll never forget the way she told me. She handed me a little onesie that said, "Dad's MVP" on the front, and when I looked up at her, she was grinning from ear to ear. I didn't even have words. I just pulled her into a hug and felt this overwhelming sense of love and hope. We were starting a family of our own, and I was determined to do everything differently. My child would never feel the way I had felt growing up. They'd know they were loved, supported, and valued, no matter what. Those years, leaving home, meeting Liz, getting married, and preparing for a family, felt like the beginning of a new chapter. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own story. I was finally free from the toxic environment I'd grown up in, and I was building something beautiful in its place. Liz and I had no idea what challenges lay ahead. But at that moment, none of it mattered. We had each other, and that was enough. A few years into our marriage, things took a turn I never saw coming. Liz and I had built a life together. Our home, our family, everything we dreamed of. Our son, Jake, was the light of my life. He was smart, curious, and had this laugh that could brighten even the darkest days. For a while, I thought I'd finally escaped the darkness of my past and created something good. But that illusion shattered when I found out Liz had been cheating on me. It started with her coworker. I can still remember the night I found out. I came across a string of texts on her phone while looking for pictures of Jake's school project. They weren't just friendly messages. They were explicit, intimate, and damning. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. I confronted her immediately, and after a lot of yelling and tears, she admitted it. She said it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. She swore it had ended and that she regretted it deeply. I wanted to walk away. Every part of me screamed to leave, to end it, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I kept thinking about Jake, about the family we'd built, and about all the promises we'd made to each other. I convinced myself it was a one-time thing, something we could move past. I forgave her because I wanted to believe in us. I wanted to believe she loved me enough to never hurt me like that again. For a while, it seemed like we were on the road to recovery. Liz was more attentive, more present, and it felt like she was trying to make amends. But then, a few months ago, the world came crashing down in a way I never could have anticipated. Liz sat me down one evening with this strange look on her face. like she was holding on to something heavy that she couldn't carry anymore. At first, I thought she was going to tell me she wanted a divorce. But what she said was so much worse. She confessed that she'd been having an affair with someone else. Not just anyone, but Alex, my brother. She told me it had been going on for years, starting not long after we'd gotten married. My stomach churned as she laid it all out. Apparently, it had started during a family holiday when we were staying with my parents. Alex, in his typical arrogant way, had started flirting with her, making comments, touching her arm, giving her that smirk he always used when he thought he was being charming. Liz said she tried to brush it off at first, but Alex kept pushing, and eventually, she gave in. That holiday flirtation had turned into a full-blown affair. They'd been sneaking around behind my back for years, meeting in secret whenever the opportunity arose. She admitted that there were times when we were at family gatherings, and she and Alex would find ways to disappear together. It made me sick to my stomach, imagining the two of them whispering and laughing behind closed doors while I sat obliviously in the next room. But the final blow came when she dropped the worst bombshell of all. She told me there was a chance that Jake might not be mine. She hadn't planned to tell me, but the guilt had apparently become too much for her to bear. I couldn't even process the words at first. Jake was my son, my little boy, the one who'd made me a father. The thought that he might not actually be mine felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I sat there in silence, my mind racing as she cried and begged for forgiveness. She kept saying how sorry she was, how she'd been confused and weak, but I couldn't hear any of it. All I could think about was the betrayal, the years of lies, the moments I trusted her completely while she was sneaking around with the one person I hated more than anyone else in the world. The worst part of it all was the sense of déjà vu. It felt like I was back in that toxic home I'd fought so hard to escape, drowning in betrayal and neglect all over again. Alex had taken so much from me growing up, and now he'd taken the one thing I thought was untouchable, my family. It was like no matter how far I ran, he was always there, finding new ways to tear me down. I didn't know what to do. I still don't. Jake is 8 years old now, and he's my entire world. The thought of losing him, of not being his father in every sense of the word, is unbearable. At the same time, I don't know how to move forward with Liz after everything she's done. Every time I look at her, I see Alex. I see the lies, the deceit, and the years I spent building a life with someone who was betraying me at every turn. The betrayal has left me broken in ways I didn't even know were possible. I've started questioning everything. My marriage, my family, even myself. How could I not have seen it? How could I have been so blind? And the worst question of all, what do I do now? After Liz confessed to the affair with Alex, I knew there was no way to salvage our marriage. The betrayal was too deep, too all-encompassing. It wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the years of lies, the deception, and the fact that Alex, of all people, was the one she'd chosen to betray me with. I filed for divorce the following week. The process was brutal emotionally and mentally. Liz begged me to reconsider, claiming she was sorry, that she wanted to make things right, but I couldn't even look at her without feeling sick. The memories of her with Alex, sneaking around behind my back, were burned into my mind. I couldn't forgive her, and I knew I never would. The only thing I could focus on was Jake. Despite everything, he was still my son, at least in every way that mattered. Liz had agreed to a DNA test to determine paternity, but I told her it didn't matter to me. Whether or not we shared blood, Jake was my boy. I'd been there for every step of his life, from his first words to his first day of school. Nothing could change that. Once the divorce paperwork was filed, I decided it was time to tell my parents everything. They deserved to know the truth, even if I wasn't sure how they'd react. My dad had always been supportive, but my mom's history of blind favoritism toward Alex made me nervous. Still, I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. When I sat them down and told them what had happened, my mom's initial reaction was exactly what I'd feared. She didn't believe me. Alex would never do something like that, she said, shaking her head. You must be misunderstanding something. It felt like I was 12 years old all over again, being told I was too sensitive, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But this time I was prepared. I played a recording I'd made of a phone conversation I'd had with Alex after finding out the truth. In it, he admitted everything. The affair, the years of sneaking around, and even his smug satisfaction at finally getting one over on me. Hearing Alex's voice left no room for doubt. My mom's face went pale, and for the first time, she didn't have anything to say. She just sat there, staring at the ground, while my dad fumed silently beside her. When the recording ended, my dad stood up and walked out of the room without a word. At first, I thought he was too angry to speak, but later I realized he was already making decisions. He called me later that night and told me he was cutting Alex off completely. No more financial support, no more safety net. Nothing. He'd always been generous with Alex, paying for his expenses, helping him with business ventures that never went anywhere, and generally enabling his selfish behavior. But now he was done. It didn't stop there. My dad also made it clear that Alex would no longer be part of the family estate. He updated his will to exclude Alex entirely and transferred everything Alex was supposed to inherit to me instead. It was a staggering amount. Nearly $5 million in total spread across properties, investments, and cash. When my dad told me about the change, I didn't know how to react. On one hand, I felt vindicated. For once in my life, Alex's actions had real consequences, and I wasn't the one paying the price. On the other hand, it felt surreal. I wasn't used to being the one my family supported. For so long, I'd been the afterthought, the one who had to fend for himself while Alex got everything handed to him. As for Alex, the fallout hit him hard. He tried to call me multiple times, leaving voicemails where he alternated between apologizing and trying to justify his actions. He even showed up at my place once, banging on the door and demanding to talk. I didn't let him in. Whatever he had to say, I didn't want to hear it. The only time I saw him face to face was when he showed up at my dad's house, begging for another chance. My dad didn't even let him inside. I watched from the driveway as he told Alex to leave and not come back. For the first time in my life, Alex looked defeated. There was no smirk, no arrogance, just a man who'd finally run out of ways to manipulate the people around him. I can't say it felt good to see him like that. There was too much pain and anger mixed up in everything for it to feel like a victory. But it did feel like justice. For once, Alex wasn't getting away with it. The divorce was finalized not long after, and Liz moved out of the house. She's still involved in Jake's life, of course, and we've managed to keep things civil for his sake. But every time I see her, there's a wall between us that will never come down. She's no longer the person I thought she was, and I'm no longer the man who trusted her with everything. As for my mom, she's been quiet ever since everything came out. I think she's struggling to reconcile the truth about Alex with the image she's always had of him. She hasn't defended him, but she also hasn't said much about it. My dad, on the other hand, has been my rock through all of this. He checks in on me regularly, spends time with Jake, and reminds me that I'm not alone in this. It's been a long road, and I'm still figuring out how to move forward. But one thing's for sure, I'm not letting Alex or anyone else take anything from me ever again. After the fallout, Alex's life took a nosedive. Without my dad's financial support, he couldn't afford to finish school or maintain the cushy lifestyle he'd gotten used to. He ended up working as a part-time mechanic at a small garage on the outskirts of town. It was a far cry from the ambitious entrepreneur he used to pretend to be, funded entirely by my dad's money. Now he was scraping by, barely able to make ends meet. As for Liz, she moved in with Alex after the divorce. The thought of them together still makes me sick, but I've learned to compartmentalize it. Jake spends half his time with them and the other half with me, as per the custody arrangement. I've done my best to shield Jake from the tension, but I know he's aware that things aren't okay between us. He's a smart kid, too smart for his own good sometimes. I just hope he doesn't blame himself for the mess the adults in his life created. Alex's situation became even more desperate over time. He started calling me, leaving these long, rambling voicemails, begging for help. The first time he called, I actually picked up, not knowing what to expect. He sounded broken, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. He pleaded with me to talk to our dad, to convince him to forgive him and help him out. He said he regretted everything, that he'd made a mistake, and that he just wanted to make things right. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. I told him, flat out, that his actions had consequences, and it was his responsibility to deal with them. "You made your bed, Alex," I said. "Now you have to lie in it." He tried to argue, bringing up Jake, saying how hard it was to provide for him without any support. That struck a nerve, but I held firm. "You don't get to use Jake as a bargaining chip," I told him. "You should have thought about him before you did what you did." He's called a few more times since then, but I've stopped answering. I just let his calls go to voicemail, and the messages are always the same: apologies, excuses, and more begging. It's ironic, really. For so many years, Alex had everything handed to him. He was the golden child, the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. And now, he's completely on his own, forced to deal with the consequences of his own actions. I wish I could say I feel satisfied seeing him struggle, but the truth is, it's complicated. A part of me feels vindicated, like karma finally caught up with him, but another part of me is just tired. Tired of the drama, the pain, and the way Alex continues to cast a shadow over my life. Even now, Jake is my priority. He's the reason I get up every morning and keep pushing forward. I've done everything I can to create a stable, loving environment for him. I take him to school, help him with his homework, and make sure he knows how much I love him. I don't want him to feel the kind of neglect and favoritism that defined my own childhood. He deserves better. As for Alex and Liz, I don't know what their future holds. Liz hasn't reached out to me since the divorce, and I have no desire to speak to her. Alex, on the other hand, doesn't seem to know when to give up. He keeps trying to claw his way back into the family, but my dad won't even entertain the idea. "He made his choices," my dad said the last time we spoke about it. "He's not my responsibility anymore." I've learned a lot from this whole ordeal. I've learned that forgiveness isn't always possible, and that's okay. I've learned that some people will never change, no matter how much you hope they will. And most importantly, I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm finally free from Alex's influence. He can't control me anymore, can't manipulate me or take what's mine. It's a hard-won freedom, and I'll do everything I can to protect it, for myself and for Jake. After the dust settled from the divorce and everything that came with it, I started focusing on rebuilding my life. I moved into a new apartment across town, far away from the memories of my old home and the life I thought I'd have. It wasn't easy at first. There were nights when the silence felt unbearable, and I found myself staring at the walls, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But slowly, things started to fall into place. Work became my escape, and I threw myself into it with more drive than I'd ever had before. I'm in a managerial position at a tech company, and not long after the divorce I got promoted. The timing felt almost poetic, proof that I was capable of standing on my own and thriving. The pay increase didn't hurt either. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just scraping by. I was comfortable, secure, and in control of my finances. One of the best decisions I made was starting therapy. I'll admit I was skeptical at first. I'd spent so many years burying my feelings, convincing myself I didn't need help, that I could just power through everything on my own. But after everything with Liz and Alex, I realized I couldn't keep carrying all that pain and anger around. Therapy became a safe space for me to unpack everything. My childhood, the favoritism, the betrayal, and the lingering scars it all left behind. My therapist has been incredible. She's helped me see things more clearly, especially when it comes to Alex. For years, I let his actions define my self-worth. Every insult, every betrayal, every time he was favored over me. It all became part of this narrative in my head that I wasn't good enough. But now I'm learning to rewrite that story. His choices, his cruelty, that's on him, not me. My relationship with my parents has also improved, though it's still a work in progress. My dad has been unwavering in his support, and we've grown closer than ever. He's made it clear that he has no intention of reconciling with Alex, and honestly, that's been a relief. My mom, on the other hand, is complicated. She stopped defending Alex outright, but she still brings him up from time to time, like she's testing the waters. "Maybe he just needs help," she said once during a phone call. I shut that down immediately. He made his choices, Mom. It's not our job to fix him. She hasn't mentioned him much since, but I can tell it's hard for her to let go of the idea of Alex as her perfect son. I don't know if she ever will, and I've come to terms with the fact that I can't control that. As for Liz and Alex, they're completely out of my life now. I made that decision for my own sanity, and I've stuck to it. Liz hasn't tried to contact me since the divorce was finalized, and Alex's attempts have dwindled into silence. I don't know what their lives look like now, and frankly, I don't care. For years, they occupied so much space in my head, but not anymore. Jake was the hardest part of all of this. I love him, I always will, but I had to make the painful decision to step back. The uncertainty about his paternity and the tangled mess with Liz and Alex made it impossible for me to maintain that relationship without reopening old wounds. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was necessary for me to heal. Now, for the first time in as long as I can remember, I feel free. I wake up in my own space, with no ghosts of the past looming over me. I go to work, come home, and spend my evenings doing things that bring me joy, reading, going for walks, trying out new recipes. I've even started dating again, though I'm taking it slow. There's a peace in my life now that I never thought I'd find. It doesn't mean everything is perfect or that I don't still have hard days. But it's different. I'm different. I'm stronger, more confident, and finally in control of my own happiness. Looking back, I see now that the life I thought I wanted wasn't real. It was built on lies and illusions. What I have now, though, is real. It's mine. And for the first time, that's enough.